Today, I want to talk about the 2024 season and Steve Cohen's conquest to a 2025 World Series. I wanted to talk about the 2025 New York Mets offseason and put 2024 in the rearview mirror. And today I'm going to be talking about the article that I recently wrote as of yesterday as to the Mets plans heading into the 2025 offseason or 2024-2025 offseason, where they should attack immediately in free agency as the postseason begins to wrap up. Let's get right into the article here titled All In Mets 2025. First of all, I want to, before we head into the offseason, we talked about this past offseason in 2024 with David Stearns talking about how the Mets were going to be competing for a playoff type team. And the run that we went on, I think automatically changes the expectations for David Stearns and Steve Cohen heading into this offseason. Now, we talk about early in the article how the Mets supposedly got lucky. You see people on ESPN saying they don't belong here. You had guys like Derek Jeter, Big Papi, A-Rod, always picking against the Mets every single game in the Philly series, the Milwaukee series, the Dodger series. Nobody believed in this team except for us as Met fans because we knew what we had in the OMG Mets this year. There was the aura around this team that Jose Iglesias brought, but that is now in the rearview mirror in 2024. Now let's look into the 2025 offseason and the expectations as we head into this offseason. Now, David Stearns, recently he talked about a statement that he had at the deadline last year where I originally get into the article was, is David Stearns a man of his word? Does he lie to the fans like so many of these GMs and owners do? He was very direct, straightforward. He thought we could compete for a playoff spot if we were a playoff caliber type team. As he says right here, we got to be in a place where we are a playoff caliber team, and he'd be more than willing to add to this team. And that is exactly what he did that past trade deadline. Here's a list right here of the guys that he brought in, notable, obviously, Ryan Stanek, Winker, and Phil Maton, who played critical roles down the stretch for the Mets, especially Stanek in the postseason. And we all know the emotional player that Jesse Winker is and the energy he brought to us heading down the stretch, going at it with Willy Adames in Milwaukee, the big home run, slamming his helmet down. This is our town, yada, yada. But he'd be a player that I would consider bring back as a fourth outfielder potentially this offseason. I don't know where he wants to be. If he wants to start, this is definitely not going to be the place for him. As we have Starling Marte, there may be a big wink free agent coming over this offseason that plays in the outfield as well. We're also loaded with outfield talent. Jet Williams, who could play center short. You have Drew Gilbert, who could play right center, who's probably projected to be a right fielder. You have Starling Marte at $20.5 million in right field. Obviously, Brandon Nimmo's not going anywhere, and center field's kind of a little bit open right now, but the Mets are loaded with these types of prospects. Now, as we keep it going, we head into Mets went on a magical run, yada, yada. We go through there. There's some stats in there. And then we get to some of the offseason comments that David Stearns talked about in his postseason press conference. A couple of the big things that I was keen in on while we were live tweeting on X at MetCastPod on all platforms. Give us a follow over there. Let us know your opinion. A lot of Met fans immediately were interested. Where does David Stearns stand on Pete Alonso? And he had a very interesting quote, and if you watch the way he said it, it almost came off as like he's not our first option. But here's a direct quote from him. I hope we have him back. I think we both understand this is a process and everyone has their own interest. There was a rumor going around that the Mets offered him a 6-year contract prior to the season starting. Him and his agent, Scott Boras, declined it, opted to go to free agency. Obviously, they're going to qualify offer him, but I think there's a really good chance, probably a 50-50 shot that Pete Alonso's not on this team next year. Now there's talk about the Mets moving to Vientos to first base. Maybe they target a third base free agent who I'm going to get to very shortly. There's also rumors going around that a guy like Nolan Arenado might be available. I know a lot of Met fans are up on him and down on him, but he is a clutch player, owed a lot of money coming down the stretch. I particularly would like to get younger at that position, but I see the predicament that David Stearns is in right now. It is time to win. It is time to win now. We have a loaded farm system. He could pretty much acquire any player that becomes available through trade if he really wants to with the talent that we have in the minors. Another thing that he talked about, he was asked about Francisco Alvarez and his development this year. He went on to say, I think that he's kind of where you would expect him to be from the development standpoint for a young budding superstar. Now, there's one thing that I've spoken to people inside the Mets organization, and they love how far along Francisco Alvarez has come as not only an emotional leader, but defensively. His frame rate is up. His communication with the pitchers, really investing into that aspect of his game. And we sometimes forget he's only 22 years old. He butted onto the scene his rookie year, kind of had a down year this past year, struggled towards the end of his season. His swing got big, but that's what happens to young players. Not everybody comes up and is a Bryce Harper and Juan Soto and is an all-pro type player right away. So I expect him to grow significantly this offseason, hopefully take another step. And then we also get to one of my favorite quotes from David Stearns this offseason. When he's at his press conference, he was asked about his financial flexibility when it comes to this offseason. And he simply said, we have a lot of money coming off the books. I would expect to spend a good portion of that. I believe the Mets have somewhere in the realm of $170+ million coming off the books, which is a ton of money. They should be absolutely at the front of the line for every big free agent out there. I don't want to hear the excuses. We heard it last year. Yamamoto wanted to go to the Dodgers. He went to the Dodgers. Ohtani didn't contact Steve Cohen. He was always going to the Dodgers. We missed out again. But we also understood, I think, Met fans, if we're being honest with ourselves, we knew last year was not the all-in year. David Stearns said he needed a year to evaluate the Mets farm system, evaluate the team. Now, one thing that I'm hearing from people inside the organization is don't be surprised if we see some trades this offseason where you're like, wow, I thought that guy was going to be a part of our future and now he's gone. Because David Stearns is one of those guys where none of these players on this team or in this organization are his players that he drafted, that he molded, that he scouted, that he signed, that all of that stuff. That's something we need to keep in perspective as a Mets fan is there's a couple of these players, whether it's the Mauricios, the Drew Gilberts, the Jet Williams, all these guys, they're not David Stearns guys. So we have a love affair for them. Of course, they're our guys. We saw Alvarez when he was 17 years old. I'm not saying he's getting traded, but players of that nature, they're not his guys at the end of the day. So don't be surprised if some of those guys we find on the move. A follow-up quote that David Stearns had that same press conference. The entirety of the player universe is accessible to us. I anticipate taking advantage of the opportunity in certain spaces. Music to my ears when I hear that. That, when you read between the lines, tells me we're going to be at the front of the line. We're going to be number one. We are not going to be outbid. We have access to every player. Steve Cohen is giving him whatever the hell he wants and stepping out of the way and letting David Stearns do his thing. Look what he did in Milwaukee. That team wins divisions. They're constantly in the playoffs. They trade guys like Corbin Burns. They trade the big-time closer, and they always have another cycle through of players coming through, and they're always competitive. Imagine what David Stearns would have done if he actually had money in Milwaukee, the same money that he has here now. That's what excites me. And then as I continue through the article, we get to some of the notable free agents. Obviously, Juan Soto, Corbin Burns, Pete Alonso, Sasky. I don't think he's going to be coming over from Japan due to the new rules. I know a lot of MLB analysts say that there's a potential for him to be coming over. I don't see that happening because he can get a $300+ million payday potentially at age 25. He's only 22, so that restricts a lot of what he could do. Pretty much you're using international pool money type money. $7, $8, $9 million to bring him over here when he could wait a couple years. You have Garrett Cole with the opt-out, Max Fried, and the guy that I think the Mets may have interest in. If they lose out on Pete Alonso, if they lose out on him and Pete says, you know what, I'm taking my talent somewhere else to Chicago, wherever, maybe the Mets move Alex Bregman bring him in as an elite defensive type third baseman. He had a down year to start, but ended up in the 260s, 20-plus bombs, and moved Vientos to first base. That's a player to watch. Blake Snell, Willie Adames, Shane Bieber, that ace right there. Anthony Santander, Jack Flattery, who got lit up by the Yankees. Tanner Scott, Cody Bellinger, Christian Walker, Nathan Eovaldi, just to name a few more. Now, I was told, I had a really interesting conversation with a couple of former Mets players, one player in particular who not necessarily wanted to name anonymous, but I don't want to throw them under the bus. When I was talking to them during the season around the All-Star break, when we were talking to them at MetCast, said to us, the Mets have a lot of good talent. The Brandon Nimmo's, the Starling Martes, the Pete Alonsos, at the time, Vientos before he butted into what he was. Even Francisco Alvarez, the Jeff McNeils. They're good players. Nobody's saying they're not good players. But this team to win a World Series needs elite level talent. The Juan Sotos, you look at these lineups that are in the World Series right now. Look at the three hitters in a row. Ohtani, Betts, Freeman. Then you got Soto, Judge, Stanton. We need that elite level type of players. And then you look at the aces that are on these staffs. Bueller's been pitching lights out. Yamamoto shut the Yankees down. You got Garrett Cole on the other side. We need that type of pitcher. I am fine bringing Sean Manaea back here on a 2-year contract. Remember, he's 33. He is not some 28-year-old stud who we developed and yada, yada. No. It was a good part of the season this past year, but I think signing a player like Corbin Burnes is an absolute must. Front end type of guy, 29 years old, 8+ stuff. Still, even with a down year in KP9, he still averaged 9+ per 9 innings. I'm bringing him in here to be my number one. Maybe the Mets go out and trade for a guy in Crockett, who I talked about right here. Garrett from the White Sox, a legitimate ace, younger type player. A lot of people were turned off because he said he wasn't pitching because he had innings limits, yada, yada. I don't care. Get his ass here. Be our 2A or 1A, whatever the hell you want to call it. Because what cost us the Dodgers series is we couldn't pitch. We averaged 4.5 runs a game, and we gave up 7.5. You can't win a World Series giving up 7.5 runs a game. I understand the lineup that we're going up against with the Dodgers. But at the end of the day, elite pitching always prevails in my eyes. So go get those 2 elite pitchers. That doesn't take us out of the Juan Soto sweepstakes, by the way. $170+ million coming off the books. If you're telling me Corbin Burnes gets 30, if you're telling me Crockett, who's making next to no money but wants an extension, maybe you extend him, give him a long-term deal, make him $20 million a year. That's still only $50 million. You still have 120, 130, 140 plus to go out and spend to make this roster elite. Got to add to the bullpen. We need elite players in the bullpen. We can't rely on guys like Phil Maton throwing 88 miles an hour. That might get you through the regular season, but it's not going to get you to a World Series. Look at the Yankees a few years ago, and I hate to keep talking about them. But remember, they had the Betances in his prime, the Andrew Miller in his prime, Aroldis Chapman in his prime. They were pitching 6-inning games. That's what we need to do. We have Diaz at the end of the game. Go get an elite setup man and get some guys that can come in here and pitch in the 6th and 7th inning. I'm tired of the Adam Ottavino types. Everyone knew he was washed going into last year. Nice guy, but he was washed. And he lost his role here. But that's where I'm at. Elite pitcher, elite ball player in the field. And who knows? Maybe a big trade coming down the line. A lot of you guys saw my Vladimir Guerrero video that I did earlier last week. I actually think that's a realistic opportunity. There's whispers, and when there's whispers, there's a flame. We always hear about that in sports. Where there's smoke, there is fire. And I expect the Toronto Blue Jays to make an offer for Vlad Guerrero Jr. this offseason, much like Cleveland planned to do with Lindor. And if it doesn't pan out, I expect him to be moved. And the Mets have the farm system to do it. We heard Steve Cohen talk about 4 years. I want an elite bullpen farm system because he wants to be able to do what the Dodgers did. Acquire any player at will. And that's what they could do now. So go make the moves, David Stearns. Let me know if you agree with me in the comments. Corbin Burnes, pitching, follow up by an elite batter too. Do you want Alonso back? I'm not sold on that. If you're telling me he's getting 8 or 9 years, no thank you. No thank you. Maybe I'm wrong. But we have more articles coming out next week. Jason Love's working on an article talking about the pros and cons of Pete Alonso. Make sure you give us a follow at MetCastPod across all platforms. Until next time, peace.